Former NPA prosecutors advocate Nomgcobo Jiba and advocates Lawrence Mrwebi have again been fingered for interference in investigations involving senior police officials. Former Hawks investigator Colonel Kobus Roelofse has detailed how the pair frustrated critical investigations into the looting of the Secret Service fund and charges against then crime intelligence boss Richard Mdluli. Roelofse is giving testimony for the third day at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry into the alleged capture of law enforcement agencies. Roelofse has pointed a finger at Mrwebi as being the main man behind the interference. He says despite overwhelming evidence against Mdluli, Mrwebi pulled out all the stops to block the prosecution, even claiming that the police's investigation was illegal. Roelofse also revealed, or testified rather, how Mdluli also frustrated the investigation when his suspension was lifted in 2012. He says several crime intelligence members involved in the case were later purged. Roelofse says there was a lot of resistance from both police and prosecutors. Let's get some more on that state capture inquiry. I'm joined in studio by our reporter Manqoba Mchunu. A very good afternoon to Manqoba. Let's talk about the testimony of Roelofse, specifically when it comes to what happened at the National Prosecuting Authority.
Well, of course, we hear similar names cropping up again. You recall that this is the second leg that we've had so far in the past few months of the alleged capture of law enforcement agencies. Obviously, before, we've heard the former NPA boss, Mrwebi, we've heard the likes of the former Hawks head in KZN, Johan Boysen, as well as the former IPID boss, Robert McBride, all corroborating the evidence that we're hearing today about the alleged capture of those law enforcement agencies and the police, or the so-called rogue police that have been involved in serious crimes, and how the NPA or some officials at the NPA frustrated those investigations. So the investigations were frustrated both at the police's side, with those who were investigating corruption being targeted and purged. And then on the side of prosecutions, those cases, some of them never saw the light of day. They were never prosecuted in court. And again, the similar names keep on coming up from all of these people that have testified before. And those names being that of Nomgcobo Jiba, as well as Lawrence Mrwebi, of course, who are now suspended. And the allegations are that, of course, they were the ones who were behind the interference. They were the ones who pulled all the stops to frustrate those investigations. And of course, Roelofse is saying that in this case, they were investigating Richard Mdluli for the looting of the Secret Service. Not only that, but for the murder charges that he had faced back then. But he says Lawrence Mrwebi went or pulled out all the stops in order to try and frustrate that investigation. He even took the matter to court, but in the end, Mrwebi was adamant that, there's simply not enough to prosecute this case, and this case was frustrated by him. He says he's never experienced such a thing in his life. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
It is not just a resistance. This was a deliberate attempt not to continue with the investigation. And I think it was thought that and that is normally what happens, that if the NPA say to the South African Police Service, the matter is closed, the matter will not be dealt with, would not be investigated further. Although that is not necessarily the case, you can always investigate the matter further until you find the evidence that would have the NPA reconsider the decision. But in this regard, to me, it was quite deliberate to stop the investigation, and I based that on the letters that was written and our request that we made at the time.
So, of course, our colleague Griselda Lewis got an exclusive with Richard Mdluli, who said that he will go to the state capture inquiry and say his bit. But there was testimony to how he allegedly purged people. Tell us about that. Well,
of course, there was testimony being led about that. And it didn't start there. Of course, you recall that Roelofse has testified over the last few days about how he had been part of those who frustrated his investigation into the secret fund, of course, with, declassifying some of the information or the documents that were needed. And then he says that, after this incident of him raising this matter and taking this matter as far as the court. He says after Mdluli's suspension was lifted in 2012, of course, Mdluli, when he came back and took over again as crime intelligence boss, that's when the purge began. And he targeted specifically those people who were investigating this matter. And of course, this is not the first time we hear this. We heard that in the previous testimonies of how those that were investigating corruption cases against senior police officials were targeted, and ultimately counter charges were formed up against them. You recall the likes of General Sibia, recall Anwar Dramat, for example. Those are the people that were really targeted, and these are the people who have been investigating people like Richard Mdluli. So he says at the time, those members of the crime intelligence members were actually targeted for doing their job and investigating Mdluli. Let's take a listen.
During that period that he went back to work, I was informed by crime intelligence members, quite a few of them, that General Mdluli set in motion a drive to identify those CI members who had assisted me in the investigation, the crime intelligence investigation. The result thereof is that more than 20 members of crime intelligence were transferred within days after his reappointment. People which he thought of or suspected of assisting me.
Manqoba Mchunu, following that state capture story for us, thanks so much for your time on Point this afternoon. Manqoba will continue following that story and giving us updates as they come in.